Good morning. How are you all doing? Thank you so much for being here. This is the last day, and I know that you've had a full weekend. Before we get started, I was hoping that we could give a thank you to Skeptrack, who has put on an amazing series of panels, including one where they had young people talking about what it's like to be raised skeptical. That was absolutely phenomenal, like just better than I could have hoped. So can we give them a round of applause to thank them? It was just a really great weekend. All right, well, today we are going to be talking a little bit about deep fakes. And I realize that there's a little bit of irony in coming to a presentation given by somebody completely concealed in a costume and talking about deep fakes, but it actually gives me a little bit of an intro to talk about why deep fakes are different than things that we've seen before. There we go. So deep fakes aren't just regular things that are set up to trick or to fool you or to conceal reality. They actually are different because they have to do with artificial intelligence or machine learning that is used to enhance something and create a synthesis of things. Maybe you took 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things that are real and then make them into something that never actually happened. So it's an important distinction that the things that we are talking about when we're talking about deep fakes have to do with machine learning and artificial intelligence. And we'll talk a little bit more about specifically what kind of artificial intelligence are used to do deepfakes in a little while. But the reason why this is so important, and there was an article recently, I think it was in The Verge, that was talking about why it's so important to get this right, is we don't want to have deepfakes become the same kind of nonsense phrase that fake news has become. When fake news was first uttered, when that phrase was first labeling something that was misleading in the news, it meant something. And now people use the term fake news to label anything that they don't agree with. And a lot of people are afraid that that's what's going to happen with deep fakes, is that it's going to be used to apply to everything that has been enhanced or altered in some way. And it really needs to be a specific term in order for it to have meaning. So part of the reason that deepfakes are so persuasive is that in the modern age, we are accustomed to thinking about reality as something that is filtered through our own perceptions. And that's true. Each person's reality is, in fact, filtered through his or her own perceptions. But it's also true that there's an objective reality out there, that something really happens. And there's a philosopher and rhetorician named Kenneth Burke who talked about objective recalcitrance. And what he meant by that is that objectivity has a way of making itself known. And the reason for the subtitle of this talk was actually because I was reminded of that while watching Chernobyl this year, when it starts by talking about the cost of lies and what we lose when we lose the truth. Another factor that enters into this is the idea that all of us understand reality through the language that we understand things by. So in other words, if you see a fire, part of the way that you understand the term fire is by using that word. And if you had another word for fire, like if you thought of it as a reaction, as a physical reaction, then your understanding of fire is actually different than if you understand it as magic. And so all of these things have to do with the way that we understand deep fakes, because we are looking at what we see and understanding it through our own screens. All right, so this, ironically, was not a deep fake, and yet it inspired a lot of the conversation about deep fakes. How many people in the room saw this enhanced video? Most of the people. All right, I'm going to play a little bit of it, and if I am able to do it, I will stop it and go on, because we don't need to see the whole thing.
One day after that bitter and personal clash, both President Trump and Speaker Pelosi were today dialing it down. But tonight, this video, edited to make Pelosi appear as if she were slurring her words, has gone viral, raising serious concerns. This is the original.
Most currently, that he was engaged in a cover-up.
And this is the manipulated video released by a website that Rudy Giuliani retweeted.
Most currently, that he was engaged in a cover-up.
This was very truly surprising for me.
While some fake videos are used for humor.
Okay, so the reason that is not actually, The reason that that is not actually a deep fake is because all they had to do to make that work is to slow down the video. And then it looked like she was slurring her words. But it did generate a lot of discussion about deep fakes because it was the first time that it had been used in a campaign that people got caught actually, altering something, making it look as if it were real. And I guarantee you, if you went out onto the street or if you went to my hometown, you would find people who saw that original video and who never saw the follow-up that talked about how it had been altered and who altered it and why that was important. So there are people out there right now who think that that video of Nancy Pelosi slurring her words are fake. Actually, though, deep fakes are more like this video.
My agents called me to say Jenji Cohen is producing a show for Netflix. It's about a women's wrestling show from the 80s. And I was kind of like, what an idea. And they were like, no, it's a real thing. And I started Googling it, and the videos are crazy. It's the most bizarre thing because it wasn't just wrestling. It was like a real outlier from what wrestling was at the 80s. And it's like Hulk Hogan and the Iron Sheik and stuff like that. And then these are like women of all shapes and sizes, like on our show. They were actresses and models who got cast on this show and learned how to wrestle. And they don't just wrestle on the show. They do sketches and they rap.
Yeah.
They rap.
All right. The reason that that is so disturbing is because if you weren't in this presentation and if you didn't see the lower part of Jim Carrey, or the lower part that is not Jim Carrey as opposed to the upper part that is, like that was a very well done, what they call face transplant. And it can be done for anybody. Jordan Peele did one that was well circulated with President Obama. And the danger in this is that particularly now that we have siloed information, so some people get their information in one spot, some people get their information in another spot, it is completely possible with this technology to make it appear that a presidential candidate has said words that never came out of his or her mouth. And because people aren't cross-checking their information and they aren't necessarily looped into conversations where people would talk about deepfakes, the people that just encounter that one source of information are going to walk away with the impression that those things that they have seen are real. Human beings are wired so that what we see sticks in our brain as something that is in fact reality. And even sometimes when you get contrasting information, it still feels to you as if the thing that you saw is the more believable thing. And there are a couple psychological reasons for that. One of them has to do with what gets wired in first. One of them has to do with the fact that we take in all of the information and then what seems most credible, like to our brains, not through our reasoning process, but if your brain has seen and heard something, both, if you hear a verbal correction of that thing, you're going to be much less likely to give that information the same weight as the thing that you both saw and heard. Here's another one that I thought was particularly apt for this audience.
The truth is, I am Iron Man.
Iron Man hit theaters in May of 2008. But while now it may be downright impossible to imagine anyone else playing the wisecracking Avenger, for years rumors have persisted that Tom Cruise was originally slated to lead the film. And since Marvel and Cruise have remained coy on the subject, we may never know why things didn't pan out. But that hasn't stopped us from wondering, how would the MCU have looked with Tom Cruise as Iron Man?
I guess we'll find out. I'm not saying that the world is enjoying its longest period of uninterrupted peace in years because of me. Please, no gang signs. No, throw it, I'm kidding. Now, I'm not saying that from the ashes of captivity, never has a greater phoenix metaphor been personified in human history. It's about legacy. It's about what we choose to leave behind. Yeah, I can fly. Let's face it, this is not the worst thing you've caught me doing.
What have I to fear?
The Avengers.
All right, so one of the reasons I wanted to show you that one is because that one has enough glitches in it that an astute viewer could actually probably tell that that was a deep fake. And the reason that it's important is because we are leaving that time. We're leaving the time when the glitchiness is going to be detectable. Just last week, there was a new app that was released, I believe, in well, it was somewhere in Asia. I'm not gonna make a mistake and get the country wrong, but there was an app that was released in Asia that allows users, just regular old users, to do this kind of face transplantation and make their own deepfake videos. Now, where do you think, just in this group, I'm sure this audience will know, where do you think that this technology is being practiced most actively? Porn. Whoever said porn, you are correct. Like so many things in our society, technology is being driven by porn because there's a tremendous audience of people who would like to see their favorite celebrity in porn. Unfortunately, there's also a tremendous number of people who would like to see somebody that they hate in porn. And so that is both one of the forefronts of what's driving the technology and one of the places where it is most actively being battled, because people are finding videos of themselves engaged in activities that they were never engaged in, or engaged in activities with people that they were never even in touch with, and they are actively trying to get these things taken down. Some of the only prohibitions of deepfakes are driven by not politics yet so much as by porn. So the way that this works is that you have to have a great number of samples of whoever it is that you are going to superimpose on the other actor. And so that's why you see so many deepfakes with politicians, with movie stars like Tom Cruise, and Jim Carrey, because the samples are available. But unfortunately, because of social media and the widespread sharing of photographs, which is generally a fun thing, but it also gives enough sample sizes, probably of most of the people in this room, so that somebody could generate a reasonable facsimile of you and make a deep fake and transplant your face onto somebody else. All right, these work partially. I said I would say just a little bit about the technology. This is not my area of expertise at all. I'm much more a communications expert, so I'm going to explain this a little bit, and there may be people in the audience who can fill in some details that even I don't know. The key technology that makes this possible is called a generative adversarial network. And what that basically means is that there are two AIs that are working in combination, but also adversarially. So one of them generates content, and the other one tests that content to see if it's good enough. And the combination of those two are able to learn from what is accepted and what is rejected as being acceptable. The best metaphor, excuse me, the best metaphor that I know of for the way that this works are political campaigns. So if you can imagine one of the halves of this system starts to try to persuade someone of something, and then the other half says, no, that's not going to work. We can do it better over here if you do this. And then the learning gets better and better and better until the thing that is produced is virtually undetectable from the original. And this is why the Tom Cruise video that I showed you is so frightening, is because there are enough little errors that we can probably catch it, but as the technology gets better and better, and as they have more samples, I'm so sorry. As we have more samples, that will, it will become, oh, perfect. It'll become less and less possible to detect those errors. Thank you so much. This is a tricky thing to do. So now you know that this flying spaghetti monster cannot talk while I drink water. All right, so what I wanted to do, since this is the last day of con, and I know you guys have listened to a lot of things, I wanted to present the basic ideas, and then I was hoping that we could have some some audience-generated discussion about these topics. But before that, I want to give you just a tiny bit more information about why we should be concerned about these things. Many of you probably know that there have been several studies done that show that false information actually circulates faster than true information. And both because of the novelty and because it is something that people want to see. That is particularly true about deepfakes. There was a political video generated of President Trump that was circulated in Belgium as part of their election, and what it showed was our president saying that he had the balls to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord, and they should too. And in the past, that would have been something that people would have been suspicious of, but for a variety of reasons, people were not suspicious that our president actually said that. And so that deepfake video, which by the way, at the end even says it was fake, at the end, that video played a part in their election. And then for the last piece of information that I will give you before we open it up to discussion, I'm going to bring it back around to the Chernobyl quote that I started with, which is that, oh, you guys, I'm so sorry. Which is that the true cost of this is not that any one piece of information will be misunderstood as being true when it is in fact false. The true cost of this is that eventually we're going to give up hope of being able to distinguish the truth from lies. And when that happens, democracy cannot function. I'm hoping that you guys have some questions that we can use to discuss this topic further. And also, when you guys talk, I will have an opportunity to hopefully get control of my voice. I apologize for that. So who has questions or comments? Yes.
I sit on a state regulatory and licensing board of my profession, which is massage and bodywork therapy. And one of the issues that we have seen is that certain activities by us are illegal and will cost you your license in the blink of an eye. And revenge porn is a massive issue for my profession. We have a woman in Florida right now who was accused by her then husband as a part of their divorce, who lost her license. Then he used the loss of her license to take the children. And 3 years later, he drunkenly admitted to fabricating the entire thing, and she's fighting it. But being able to do a deep fake of a porn, that can cost some people their licenses.
Yep, and so you know, for years now, decades now, it has been possible to do a fake of a still image, and courts and juries are generally aware of that, but they are not aware, and they're certainly not aware to the extent that they need to be, about you guys, I'm so sorry. They're certainly not aware to the extent that they need to be of how easy it has become to do a deep fake of a video. And right now, it's one of the things that social media sites are having to be on guard against, and they are having to employ people specifically to identify those fakes. And it's also become an arms race in terms of using artificial intelligence and machine learning to identify the fakes. And just as in other areas, usually the people producing the fakes are a couple steps ahead of the people who are charged with identifying and taking down the fakes. And so things like that are going to become more frequent, I think, before they become less frequent. And I have not yet found any cause for believing that we're going to be able to identify them anytime in the near future. I wish I had better news about that. Someone else?
One thing I was wondering about is like how close maybe I guess the audio fabrication technology is to catching up with the video, because with like several of the things that were shown, the video was like reasonably convincing, but there was usually something off with the audio. Like the clip where someone was being interviewed for Glow, they didn't have like Jim Carrey talking, so that was pretty easy to go, okay, cool, this is a fabrication. The Tom Cruise's Iron Man one was pretty easy to figure out because aside from the visual glitches, the sound mixing was completely different. It was a sound-alike in a booth versus someone like on camera. So I wonder like if there's like that's one weakness to point it out, but I'm wondering if that's going to like catch up at some point, or if it's
so that depends on where people spend their time and energy, because it has been possible for a while now to piece audio together relatively convincingly if you are willing to spend the time to mix it and to to isolate all the different pieces. So that piece is possible. What's much more common right now is to just get someone, to do the low-tech version and to get someone to do the audio convincingly enough. You know what I mean? So a celebrity impersonator or something like that. It's also the case in things like the revenge porn that was just being discussed, that sometimes just no audio is used. You know what I mean? It depends on what the purpose of the deception is. And this is a new enough term, deepfake, that we don't even have an agreed upon definition of what exactly it consists of, which is why I thought it was important to get that out at the beginning. But what you're talking about, the things are possible. It just depends on the extent to which it's important. And the sad fact is that right now, we can outsource so many things. Like you could say, I want you to isolate all the audio clips that are necessary for me to do this thing. You can outsource that work, put together the video, have most of what you need in audio at a relatively low cost if you're willing to take the time and energy to do that. So it's a great question, and it isn't that there aren't any glitches with it, but it is mostly that if people will put the time and energy into it, the technology is already not only readily available, but already in use. Yes?
You said that there's an automated tool out there for helping generate the deep fakes here, especially the video. Is there people working on similar automated tools for detecting those things? Like maybe looking at a given video, maybe looking at like around the edges of it or somewhere, or within like the audio part of the track. Maybe there's some little thing there about where one track got put in with the other one that has some kind of like a little bit of a audio signature to it, or some corresponding video signature to it, like around the edges of it, that sort of thing.
That's a great question. So the key to the question that you just asked was in the last things that you were talking about. If in the input stage, so if when the original is generated, it is marked with a signature, then it is more possible to tell when something is fake. But the problem is that any audio and video that you download, you can download in a format and then change it to a different format and get rid of the signature. Do you see what I'm saying? So you could definitely identify an original that was watermarked with the kind of encryption that you're talking about or something like that, but that doesn't stop somebody from taking that video, converting it, stripping it of whatever that is, and then altering it again. The reason I switched to this more information page is because the app that was just put out last week, or just went viral last week, is called Zao. And I think I have a typo. It's supposed to say Zao. Deepfake app goes viral. But that is the one that's just available that anybody can download right now. And I'll make this available. You guys don't have to take pictures of it if you don't want to. But yeah, that one, anybody can download that now and make their own deepfake, face transplant video. And so what you're saying is correct. We definitely at the input stage can encrypt things, but it doesn't stop people from converting it and then making their own thing out of it. I wish it did. I wish. Oh, go ahead. No.
We'll go into more details later.
Okay. Yes.
This is actually a good follow-on. I'm in a Master's of Archiving and Records Administration program right now, and our universe is kind of all a Twitter about deep fakes and how archivists can help figure out and discern, but again, it's only as good as our training and institution. So if anyone's interested, there's a Gizmodo article from last year, I think it was October, that talks about deepfakes and how archives can help. So support your archivist.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to say. But again, it's be skeptical. I know we're all skeptics here, but just be skeptical.
I'm actually so glad that you said that, because one of the things that we're all going to have to get better at doing is tracking down original information. And unfortunately, what I see happening in the political sphere especially is that we are becoming divided between the people who are willing to do that work and the people who would really rather just have information that already conforms to the things that they think. And that second position is more comfortable. I mean, there are lots of days when I would like to believe something that I hear rather than trying to figure out if it's true or not. And one of my personal rules is the more glee I feel at something that is just presented to me in the news, the more I feel like I have to go check it out. You know what I mean? Because if it's something, you know, that I'm not gonna pretend that I'm neutral on this. If it's something that President Trump said that's incredibly stupid and I want it to be true because I think he's an idiot, I have to go research that a lot because I don't want to share any fake information no matter how much I would like it to be true. But the Twitterverse and Facebook particularly those are both spaces where people would much rather share things very, very quickly. And then later, if they find out it's wrong, maybe they'll make a correction, maybe they'll take it down, or maybe they'll just say, oh, well, I guess I was wrong that time. And that's how we are becoming so divided, not in terms of, you know, liberal or conservative, but in terms of the information that we actually think is true. I spent some time at my local feed store trying to dissuade them of the notion that aborted fetuses are in their Coke and Pepsi. And as I was doing it, that is a real thing. Look it up. Like, people really believe that. And I was just in there one day, and they were all upset about that. And I thought, you know, you could walk back out of the feed store, or you could spend 20 minutes and try to correct this ridiculous notion that they could have figured out in 10 minutes of looking. And all of us are going to have to decide that. And so archivists and librarians and people who curate information are going to become absolutely indispensable in the future because we're all going to need help. None of us are equipped to know what is correct in every single area of knowledge. So we're going to have to identify the experts, and we're going to have to identify the generalists like librarians and archivists who can help us figure out those things. Yes?
I had a question on what your perception is on the danger of deepfakes and our politics. Because in my mind, fake ideas are more damaging than fake videos. So if you have like a fake video, you can easily look at it and say, okay, this is discredited because this video was fabricated, versus a fake idea, whether it's on, say, immigrants or the environment or flat Earth. It's kind of harder to discredit those ideas. So do you think deepfakes are inherently damaging to our democracy any more so than fake ideas have been before?
That is a great question. So the short answer is I do not think that they are more damaging, but I also think that those are all parts of the same universe. And the reason that I think that is because people are going to use these deep fakes as evidence of the ideas that you're talking about. You know what I mean? So let's just take the anti-abortion debate for one. When the fake ideas were circulating about how much money Planned Parenthood was making from the parts of aborted zygotes and fetuses, part of the evidence that was used had been cobbled together from different pieces of evidence, and then they made it together as if it was a whole thing. And that was not a deep fake. That was another instance of somebody just using existing things and putting them together in a way that was misleading. But those things in the minds of people who encountered them and never encountered like what I think of as kind of the antidote, you know, the information that would let you know that that wasn't actually true, all of that stuff went together. So that idea that you correctly point out is the more harmful thing, that idea was supported by the fake evidence. And I think increasingly the deep fakes are going to do exactly that. And again, coming back to the conclusion slide, one of the things that's going to happen is some people are going to abandon the idea that we can actually find out what really happened. And that's going to be the point at which I don't know that we can recover from. You know what I mean? Because if we don't think that it's possible to find out what's true and what's not true, I don't know where democracy can possibly go. And I don't want to sound too pessimistic, because when we face, you know, these things have happened before. It has been the case that people said when Photoshop was first becoming popular, nobody's going to be able to know the truth, and you know, everything will be terrible. And we've gotten used to the idea that images can be faked. But it did turn off a certain amount of people from the idea that you could ever see something and try to make a determination. And that's what I hope doesn't happen in the case of deepfake videos. But you're absolutely right. The false ideas, the fake ideas, the misrepresentation of information and data is absolutely, you know, that's the major threat. And this, to me, is one way that more of that can happen. Thank you so much.
So, my bad. So when you have photoshopped fakes, there are artifacts that you can tell beyond any context. You don't have to look at the context. You don't have to go find an article and determine, is this guy, did this really happen? Is this what he would have done, or is this whatever? Now with video, what sort of artifacts should you look for if you want to determine a deep fake? Just the artifacts, just technical side. That's
a really great question. So one of the things that you can look for is the framing that looks like a mugshot. So either, you know, straight on or slightly to the side. And the reason for that is because that's where they're going to find the most consistent data that they can use to compare and replace. You know what I mean? So all of this is a synthesis of the person, the actor that they're using, and the person that they're replacing them from. So they're going to look for those head-on versions. You know, not any kind of angle like if I were talking to you like this, it would be a lot harder for you to find other images of the flying spaghetti monster like this, because there are just a lot more that are like this, and that's true too. So when you see those headshot-looking framing, even the Jim Carrey one, they were moving around some, but the majority of it was, you know, standing there like this, because that's where the majority of the information can be found. Another artifact to look for is in the blinking. For some reason, blinks are very difficult to get right, and so you will notice blinkings that aren't exactly correct, and it's I don't have the vocabulary to explain how the blinks are wrong, but you'll notice it at the corners of the eyes, and just the way that the, like your eyelids connect with the skin that's around them, you can tell sometimes that those things do not match. The other thing you can look for are the blending areas, the place where, if you think about the old cartoony predecessors of the deepfakes, where they would take a picture of someone and then superimpose other lips onto the picture of that. Like if you imagine where the edges of those lips were, you know what I mean, like maybe half an inch around the mouth, look for those kinds of places. Also like the crinkly parts of your eyes. So sometimes they'll get the eyes themselves, but whereas the eyes are narrowing and there should be little crinkle lines, there won't be the crinkle lines, because what they have identified, the part that they've transferred, is bounded by the eyelids, if that makes sense. So all of those places where the blendings would happen, the framings, blinking, gestures that the person makes with their arms or hands that don't go with what is happening. Like right now, if I gestured to you like this, my eyebrows would raise a little bit, you know, with that gesture. When you see that those things don't go together, all of those are artifacts. And that's such a smart question, and I'm so glad that you asked it, because we're all going to have to get better at looking for things like that. Whoever would have thought that I'm going to have to look at somebody's blink and see if there's eyes crinkle? But those are some of the ways currently that you can tell that something's faked. Thank you so much for that question.
Oh, thank you for your answer.
You're very welcome. Yes?
Hi. An issue that's related to all this, I think, is the reporting of a lot of these things in the news media, and I think you touched on that a little bit. But that's one of the things that's disturbing to me. I feel like a lot of the reputable news outlets will just put things out there in a way to say, we're not saying it, but this is being said. Yep. Or this is being done, this video is going viral. They're not saying it's real or not. And that's something that's really disturbing to me. So it's sort of an abdicating responsibility. We're not fact checking this. We're just, you'll see online news stories now are often just 2 lines of text and then reposting somebody else's tweets that may have a video in it or something like that. And that's very distressing to me because it's coming from a reputable source, and we tend to think those things are real. So I think that's a real problem.
Absolutely. And what you point, there are so many dimensions to what you just pointed out. One of them is that the way that we pay attention to news completely varies from the way that maybe our grandparents used to pay attention to the news. I can remember my grandparents would sit down in front of the nightly news. They might have a TV dinner in front of them, and they would look at the newscaster as they spoke and take in that news. And now, because news is available 24/7, I can't count the amount of the volume of news that I've taken in walking through an airport. You know what I mean? So I get a little blurb here and a little blurb there and a little blurb there. And if I only saw, for instance, the Nancy Pelosi video where she's slurring her speech, I could easily get on a plane, land 5 hours later and never question that actually happened. And that is a huge abdication of responsibility to share the information, but it's also a huge abdication of responsibility on our part now not to look at things as they are in context, because it can be the most well-intentioned story about how you should pay more attention to this thing because it's fake. But if you only see the part where they're demonstrating the fake part, then maybe you don't know that the actual intent was the opposite of what you took away from it. And that's a huge problem. And I'm not in any way excusing the media. I'm just saying that it is a combination. We live in a universe now where definitely the media has the opportunity to slant things one way or another, but also the people who are consuming it can choose the thing that they want to believe, or, and this is, I think, the more common condition, or we can all just be very passive consumers, and I'm not saying this of anybody in this room, but we can also be really lazy consumers of information and let it just kind of drift in without taking any time to consider whether the information that we're getting even makes sense. I'll go back to the example at the feed store. Is the first thing that I asked her is, do you think that would be cost effective to use fetuses as flavor? It just doesn't, why would you do that? And it had never occurred to her that wouldn't be the best, she just didn't even think to ask that. And she wasn't trying to be misleading, but I did wonder how many people had gone through that feed store that morning and just walked out going, oh my gosh, I guess I won't drink any more Coke or Pepsi because it's full of fetuses. And that's the world that we live in. So absolutely, reporting should be held more accountable, and things that are fake. I would like it if there were stories about things that are fake, if there would be a chyron at the bottom that said, notice, this has been debunked, or notice, this is not a representation of reality, or something like that. But until we get to that place, I think we all have to be our own editors of information and curators of information. And the reason that I've included the pro-truth pledge people at the bottom is because that's what they're doing. They're actively enlisting people to be curators of their own information. Gleb Kaspersky was one of the speakers here last year, and he was the one who acquainted me with that organization. And basically what it says is, I will be responsible for information that I pass on. And I think that is a huge first step, because we can't rely on the media to do it for us, particularly when we know that media, the way that media makes their money is by getting the most eyeballs, right? So one of the things that I think is under discussed as far as information literacy is that we tend to rely on sources of information that come to us for free. And whenever information comes to us for free, the thing that we have to always remind ourselves is that if we aren't paying the fee, we are in fact the product, right? We are being delivered to advertisers. And the way that advertisers get more eyeballs is by having content that is explosive or scary or sexy or something that gets our attention. And those things, again, are the things that are most likely to be faked. So I think it's a great point. We absolutely have to hold the media accountable. At the same time, we have to be responsible for the information that we take in, and especially the information that we pass along. So thank you so much for that question.
Sure, no problem. If I could just add one other thing just to what you just said. I think it's all related to what we were just talking about, but you said the Pelosi video was retweeted by people. If you have if that supports your agenda, you're much more likely to lower, I think, your standards of what is reasonable, and you always have that out. Like I said, not just the media, but personally. Well, this supports my political opinion, so I'm sending it forward. And if it's fake, well, that's not my fault. It looked real to me, and I just feel like we've really. And like you said, also, we're very likely to believe things we want to believe. And those tend to be outrageous and salacious things. So I think that's part of the problem.
Exactly. And we're all, that's just the way that we're wired. The thing that we can do is we can become aware of it. There are things that I want to be true, and then there are things that I do not want to be true. And just knowing which things those are and making sure to hold myself accountable to be doubly skeptical of the things that I want to be true, it's just an essential skill. And as deepfakes become more ubiquitous, it's going to become even more essential. All right, if we don't have any more questions, could we go back to your follow-up question, person in blue? I know you had more things that you wanted to say that you stepped out of line so other people could talk, but definitely if other people have questions, come on up.
Only thing I had was another guy had answered that kind of question. I know when you talked about a moment ago, you said so put in like encrypted marks and things that kind of allow things to keep track and so forth. The fake course can be removed and transformed. And I guess the question I was thinking about asking was like, when you're looking at a thing itself, when it has been edited, and I think somebody here said something about when you were talking about looking at the eyes and so forth, and they thought blink doesn't look right, that kind of thing, or maybe somewhere around the battery where the face gets blended into the face of the thing that's being blended into. That there's some kind of automated tools to help look at that as well as generate it in the first place. Yes, there absolutely are, and people are working on. Every day, people are working on the technology to detect the things that are fake, and just as it was predictable that porn would be one of the drivers of deep fake generation, it's also predictable that our government would be one of the generators or one of the drivers of the detection, because it's really important to people who are in the business of trying to figure out, for instance, terrorist threats, to figure out which pieces of evidence are true and which pieces of evidence have been manipulated, right? So there are definitely people who are working on this. The sad thing that is true in almost all areas where there's like an arms race is that there's more incentive on the side of the people who are generating the fakes. So usually they stay at least a little bit ahead of those who are generating the fakes. The ones who are detecting are usually just a little bit behind, but definitely there are people working on those. I don't have any information off the top of my head on what those programs are called, and I suspect some of the best ones are probably not for public consumption yet, which is another problem because some of the very powerful deepfake generators are available for public consumption. And as we know, when you make something open source, you increase the likelihood that a lot of people are going to work on it and improve it. So that's another thing that makes it a little bit asymmetrical as far as the development goes. Thank you so much.
You mentioned the way your parents would watch the news, and I have seen, and I've also read, in my personal experience, and I've read that people of my parents' generation are just much less skeptical and much more likely to spread falsehoods over the internet. And I think part of that is because, when we were coming up, if you saw Walter Cronkite on the news saying something, you could bank on it. You knew that it had been vetted. And now anybody can put something out in print. And I think that for people that haven't come up in that era, You know, they see it in print, got to be true. See it on the TV, it's got to be true. Or else they wouldn't let it happen, right? I mean, because that's what it had been prior to this information overload. So you also mentioned hearing from children that were raised skeptical. Do you think that the younger people are going to be better prepared for this onslaught of deep fakes, or is the technology always going to be just so far ahead of what we as humans can deal with that we'll be chasing after it?
It's a great question. So the short answer is that I think that what makes us susceptible to deep fakes is much more about the way that we understand stories and the way that narratives resonate with us in a way that data doesn't. You know what I mean? So the reason that we get taken in by videos easily is because a video constructs a story for us. We can see it, we can hear it, it fits into other stories that we know. It's less the technology and more the way human beings register information. And then as far as the difference between generations, it's definitely true that people who have grown up with digital technology and multiple unvetted sources of information understand that that just because something is in print doesn't make it true. That's true, but it's not true that they are necessarily more critical of information because of that, if that makes sense. So in other words, I teach, and the young students that I deal with are just as likely to believe something that purports to be from an authoritative source as older people are to believe something that purports to be from an authoritative source. Now, what they understand as an authoritative source has changed a little bit, and that change actually makes them less skeptical. In my experience, young people are more likely to believe what they hear from celebrities, whereas older people wanted to hear from someone, you know, with some kind of credentials. And it worries me quite a lot that that younger people will generally think that someone who is popular in the media has more authority than somebody who has a PhD, for instance. Excuse me again. So I wish that the answer to the question that you asked me was yes, people who grew up with more digital information will be more skeptical naturally, but I think that the answer is that their blind spots are simply in different places. And then the last thing, you know, when you were talking about seeing Walter Cronkite on the news, sometimes we get nostalgic for things that were never actually the case. And one of the things is that in the olden days, the news used to be objective. And it's always been the case that all information is delivered from a particular ideological perspective. And what has changed now is that we can identify those so readily and only choose to get the information that is from the ideology that we agree with. And that's why it's so very important that we cross-check our information with other sources that range across the ideological spectrum, because otherwise we don't even know what might be the case, if that makes sense. We have to go outside the bubble that we're comfortable with and make sure that we look at things that might not agree with us just to show us where some of our blind spots might be. That was a very good and complicated question. I know I gave you 3 different answers to 3 different parts of it. I hope I got all of the questions that you asked. All right, how about other questions? I know you guys must have a couple more. All right, well, let me, oh, yes, please, I'm sorry. My peripheral vision is not good.
Well, you got those new meatballs, you know.
I do. Yeah, they're implants. They are.
Oh, God, that was awesome. Okay, so I was in an airport recently where when you go to look for your gate, it recognizes your face.
Yep.
And it was creepy.
Yep.
And do you see any of that technology being hijacked for these purposes?
Yeah.
Or if you can imagine a better question.
No. So that's something that I kind of breezed by a little bit, is that when we first started talking about deepfakes, one of the comforts was that they were really only able to work with the amount of data that famous people have. But now, all of us have so many images online that it's really the case that it could be any of us. You know, most of us in this room probably have enough pictures online that somebody, you know, if they have enough pictures of you that they can tell if it's you in an airport, if those pictures exist, enough of those, then probably there are enough pictures of you available to other people that they could generate a deep fake of you doing something. Like, it might not be a good one. It would probably be even worse than the Tom Cruise one that I showed you. And your blinks would be wrong, and the edges would be, you know, they would have the kind of artifacts that we talked about. But it would be possible to do it. And that brings us back to the very first question, you know, from the person whose colleague was abused by the legal system in having a deep fake used against her. I mean, that this is something that we all really do need to worry about. It's not just that we might be fooled when we go to cast our ballot. It's also that any of us could have somebody get mad at us and decide that they're going to make a video that shows us doing something horrible. And it could be porn, or it could be animal abuse, or it could be, you know, any number of things that we didn't really do. And especially since some of these databases are places where we wouldn't know to look for them. You know what I mean? So right now it's possible for government agencies to use your driver's license ID and, you know, the IDs that you have had, you know, like your passport and things like that. So those exist, but also anybody could have downloaded all of your, you know, Facebook pictures where you've allowed Facebook to tag yourself or to tag you. This is not a concern only for celebrities. It's anybody who has an online presence. And even if you don't have an online presence, your friends might have an online presence for you. So yeah, that's actually very scary. Yes, Margaret, how are you?
I'm fine, Teddy. Thanks for being here. You've got balls.
I do. That is absolutely
Did you
true.
have fun at the parade?
So much fun. The parade is
great.
a blast.
Thank you for
event.
being part of our Skeptic.
It was my honor. It is truly. I've always been a skeptic, and I'm happy to be recognized as one.
So I have a personal question, but some of the audience members might be able to relate to it. Someone set up a fake website using my photos, describing me as a leader of the cult. Yep. And it was horrible, horrible website, which was obviously not one. It was created by an enemy of some sort. Mm-hmm. So I complained. I've written to Facebook. I've tried to get Google to take it down. Nobody responds to me.
Yep.
What is the next step other than suing? I know who did it, by the way, because we traced back the IP address. And we know who did it. Mm-hmm. I just think that if I sue this person to stop it, it would create such a time waste of things that I could be doing constructively. Yep. And when people have gone to the website, they know it's shit, you know, they know it's not me, but it just might damage me in some way.
Yep.
I don't know.
No, that is a great question, and that's something that we are seeing with respect to this election. There are already multiple websites of not just national but local and state candidates where someone sets up a fake web page and then they describe the policies. You know, they don't do it as over the top as your adversary did, and instead they just tweak the position subtly. So instead of saying, you know, the candidate is pro, let's see, well, pro-life or pro-choice. Like if the candidate is pro-choice, they might say this candidate wants to fund 5 free abortions for everyone per year or something like that. And I don't think that that's subtle, but those are the kinds of things that actually, you know, people do. And what is necessary, I think, and this is a controversial thing, we might get some pushback in this room. I think what has to happen is we need to start having regulation of social media sites more along the lines of broadcast regulation rather than like database regulation. So right now, the way that most of the laws work is that they are treated as a conduit. They're not responsible for any of the content that they display. And unfortunately, what's happened is that people are now getting their news primarily from Facebook in a lot of cases. And if that's the case, and it is, I think that we need to regulate them like we regulate broadcasters, so that they are responsible for the veracity of what they put forth. And if that were the case, then you'd have a good target. But you're right, if you were to sue the person who did that, probably the first thing that would happen is a lot of publicity would happen that would just bring more attention to their cause, whatever it is. So that would be terrible. And then the other thing is that somebody else could just put up another one in 2 days. You know what I mean? And it doesn't even matter. So I think that we need to regulate the social media sites themselves so that they have a responsibility to be more responsible for their content. Now that's going to mean that they have to change their whole business model, because right now they don't have anybody that polices that. But I think in order to make any kind of real change, that's where it's going to have to be, because you can't go after just the site or just the person who published it. That's just like playing whack-a-mole all over the place. And it is awful, and that is actually going to have repercussions. That's going to have real-world effects in this upcoming election, especially at the state and local level, because there won't be enough attention to it for people to know that it isn't true. Thank you so much, Margaret. Yes?
So we've talked about how this technology is going to completely destroy humanity, but do you see any benefits to this technology, such as Tom Cruise starring the next 100 Mission Impossible movies?
You know, it definitely has a lot of entertainment value. And one of the funny things that I saw when I was just researching the topic is I expected to see more outrage and more pushback. And what people said in response to some of the videos was just, oh yeah, can you make one of so-and-so being this and so-and-so being this? So it'll have that effect. It'll also allow us to customize content for instance, different demographics. I mean, so that if you come up with a great scientific video that works for us in America, but you want people in Malaysia to be able to relate to it more, we'll be able to, substitute without a whole lot of cost. We'll be able to substitute some Malaysian personalities that would be able to speak to a population, maybe for a public service announcement, that would get better traction than the way we do it now, which is just to make everybody look white and send that to all the audiences as if that were the default. So I do think that there are some great creative opportunities. That's where I would like to see us like maybe draw a line of demarcation to say this belongs over here and it doesn't belong over here. And we want to make sure that when we see it, we understand that we're consuming entertainment. The one that Peel did with President Obama, I thought really did a great job of being both of those things. It was entertaining. People were willing to look at it, and it got their attention. And maybe, I will not say maybe, I'm sure that some people who had never thought that technology was capable of doing that learned that it could be done in a way that was entertaining. So that, I think, is an opportunity. And I really do think that we will come to grips with it in the same way that we came to grips with Photoshop. But I also fear, not that the world is going to end because of it, but that it will get worse before it gets better. So thank you for that question. Guys, we have about 1 minute left. Anybody have one last question? All right, well, the last thought that I want to leave you with is that each of us has an opportunity to talk to people about this a bit and to encourage them to always check with another source, particularly, as I mentioned, when you see something and you think, oh, this is the gotcha thing, and this shows that this thing that I believe has been right all along. We each have the opportunity to talk to people about that, and even more so to demonstrate that that's what we do in our lives. I know I leave my mistakes up on Facebook and just let people know that I made the mistake, to let them know that that's possible. I try to research everything. Every once in a while I get something wrong, and I let people know, oops, oops, I was wrong, and here's who corrected me, and here's where the real information. And that's something that we can all do. So if we'll all question before we share, if we question especially the things that we agree, and if we all stay skeptical, I think that we can make it through not just this next election, but everything that comes along with it. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.